Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. So today we're going to take a look at that recent New Testament manuscript find considering the Old Syriac New Testament. Now this is a really interesting find, but if you believe the headlines that you have seen, did we really find a hidden passage in the Bible? Let's start by taking a look at some of these crazy headlines that we've seen. Look, I'll just pull some random ones up that I have seen online, like this one here from Mirror. Missing Bible chapter written 1,500 years ago, rediscovered, sharing disciples' secrets. If you wanted to know the disciples' secrets, then we've got the find for you. Or not. Or maybe we're just deceiving you and make you want to click on our article here. Or another one here. A never before seen chapter of the Bible has been discovered in the Vatican library. A never before seen chapter. We've never seen it before until now. This is so funny. Or this one. Lost Bible chapter resurfaces after 1,500 years. And this one's even more egregious. The Catholic Herald writes, long lost chapter of the Bible discovered. And you would think as a Catholic church or Catholic news article that they would at least, understand that this is not really a lost chapter of the Bible. We'll get into what that chapter is in a little bit, but first I want to show you what this find is. So you can see it right here on this news article, but I'm going to plop it up here on the page of the article that it was written on. So a gentleman by the name of Gregory Kessel had done some work and found that there was actually text underneath the text, which is underneath the text in a sort of inception sort of way, by using what's it called? UV spectral imaging. And so what you're looking at here on the screen is the actual manuscript that was, I would say, looked at. Now, this was one out of the Vatican library, and some people have pulled it off a shelf and done some new imaging techniques. So you can see on this manuscript specifically, there's some writing on there. Now, this is Georgian script. Now, I do not read Georgian. I do not understand Georgian, but according to the paper, this is Georgian script. Now, this is some sort of liturgy that's used in the Georgian church, and this has been dated, the liturgy part, to around the 10th century. Now, if you look at this carefully, you can see that there's like writing underneath it. And there's two interesting bits here. The one here is you can see some Greek characters. Let me just get right in there. You can see like a delta, an omicron, a sigma, looks like an alpha. Like there's some Greek writing under here. And then in addition to that, you can see, just barely, some Syriac script. And that's what the find is. It's that Syriac script that's under the Greek script, that's under the Georgian script. So this is a really cool find, and how they do it is just amazing. So it actually contains the passage from Matthew chapter 11, verse 30 to 12 to 26. And if you look at closely, you know what, there's another image here. Let me pull that one up. This one's a little bit more clear. Yeah, you can see the Greek writing a lot more clearly on there, and the Syriac comes over a little bit better. But if you look closely, you'll see that the Syriac spans almost the whole page in the first column. You can see that behind the Georgian text, and then it kind of gets cut off from the second column. And that is because the original manuscript that it was written on was trimmed down to meet the specifications. I don't know whether it's the specifications for the Greek text or for the Georgian text, but either way, it was trimmed down, and you can see half the column there was lost. When we see a manuscript with multiple layers of text, we call this a palimpsest, and it means something like scraped again, because what happens is if you have a parchment manuscript, right? Parchment's very, very expensive. You don't just want to throw it out when you're done with it. So what the scribe does is he picks it up and he scrapes, I don't know what kind of tool he uses, but he scrapes it away. He scrapes the top layer of the parchment away, and then it gets rid of enough of what's underneath it that you can write over top of it. So the scribe who is using this must have scraped away that Greek text in order to write the Georgian liturgy on top of it. Now, the Greek text that was underneath that is not a biblical text. It's something called the Sayings of the Desert Fathers. And apparently it talks about some hermit Christians who had conversation back and forth. Again, I'm not entirely aware of what that is, but you can Google that and find out. That's not the important bit. But then underneath the Greek text was this passage in Matthew. So this is the palimpsest. It was scraped twice and reused. It was used once and reused twice. All right, and I don't know how rare that is, but I don't think there's too many double palimpsest finds out there. Now, this find is actually fairly important because the Syriac underneath in the bottom layer is a copy of, as we've stated, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11:30, verses 12 to 26, and represents the fourth manuscript that we have now extant that contains Old Syriac. Now, early translations were done at the very, as soon as the Gospels went out, they would have been translated almost immediately. And some have suggested that the Greek New Testament would have first been translated in Syriac. So the Syriac New Testament, or the Syriac Gospels, I should say, are considered to be, by many, to be the first translation made. Now, some people would argue that Latin was probably the first translation, or who knows, maybe. But I know initially when the Old Syriac was completed, there's a reference to them being split apart, and so perhaps they were translated separately and then joined together later. Again, I don't know, that's totally speculation, but when it comes to Old Syriac, that's the kind of stuff we're seeing. Again, it's different because the Old Syriac supposedly predates the Peshitta. Now, this find underneath all of this text represents the fourth manuscript, the fourth extant manuscript that we are aware of today, which contains the Old Syriac translation. So there's one called the Curetonian Gospels. It's probably the most famous of the Old Syriac translations, named after a gentleman by the name of William Cureton. And I don't know if I pronounced that right, but either way, he dated the Gospels, the Curetonian Gospels, at the 5th century, and suggested that it goes back to a 2nd century text. Now, that's interesting, because there has been some discussion about the Diattesseron. What's the Diattesseron? Well, somebody took all 4 Gospels and put them all together to try to make a sort of chronological event to bring all the Gospels together into one book. And that happened by Tatian in about 170 AD. We know about that because there were other writings about it. More specifically, there's a commentary containing the Diattesseron from the early years, but some have suggested that that was originally a Syriac document. Now, again, we don't know entirely, but that could have potentially been the earliest Syriac. So if that's the case, then the Diattesseron would have been our first Syriac translation of the Gospel, then the Old Syriac, and then the Peshitta. And the Peshitta became the standard Syriac translation in the Syriac churches. That's a Curetonian Gospel. Then there was another Siniaticus Syriac Gospel, again dated to the late 4th or early 5th century. It was a nearly complete translation of the Gospels. I'm sure there's little bits and bobs missing here and there, but nonetheless. And then a man named Sebastien Brock had discovered back in 2016 another palimpsest manuscript containing some Old Syriac underneath. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can go take a look at some of the details found there. So this manuscript here represents the 4th manuscript that we currently have. One of the interesting bits about this, and if you read all of the news articles, okay, you don't have to read the news articles, okay, they're okay, whatever. But all the news articles did pick up on an interesting textual variant. If you take a look with me, Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 reads, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat them." Okay, that's from the New King James Version. But the New Manuscript find, actually, along with the Curetonian manuscript, reads, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and rubbed them in their hands and ate them." So the rub them in their hands, that's not something that we find in Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. In fact, the Old Syriac, I believe, is the only place where this variant occurs in Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. So some have touted this as a new variant that we haven't seen before, but we've known about it because it's been in the Curetonian Syriac for quite some time. So Now, I took a look at the CNTTS apparatus and the Nestle-Aland 28 apparatus, and it doesn't mention this variant at all. But if you go to the Nestle-Aland 27th edition, it does contain this variant. So that's rather interesting. Interesting how the NA28 doesn't include it. They just figured that they didn't need to put it in there for some reason. I'm sure somebody is wishing they had done that now. But if you want to find details about that, you can go to the NA27. Just lists it there as a variant in the Curetonian Syriac. What's the source of this textual variant? More than likely, it's going to be some sort of gospel harmonization, because if you go to Luke chapter 6, verse 1, it reads, "Now it happened on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate them, rubbing them in their hands." I think what's more than likely here is somebody remembered that from Luke's gospel and then put that into Matthew's gospel as he was copying it down. So this is definitely an interesting find. This is really neat. It's amazing. Go away for a vacation for a week and all of a sudden, boom, headline. Anyway, this was a neat little find over the week, and just to kind of wade through the headlines and some of the the media surrounding the project, I've left a link in the description below to the actual paper that Gregory Kessel had written about this find, and you would probably do well to read that. There's lots of links and interesting information in there, and you'll probably find that helpful. Anyway, if you liked this video and found it helpful, please go ahead and hit that like button. The Google algorithm likes that sort of thing, and don't forget to subscribe and share. And until next time, brothers and sisters, we'll see you around.